And I'd like to welcome all of you to Identifying Abuse and Alienation, Getting Proper Documentation Before the Legal Battle. This is the second free webinar in a series of, I don't think we know how many, that we plan to do with Been There, Got Out and Charlie McCready. So welcome. And basically half the people in abusive relationships, especially involving emotional abuse, don't realize what's happening isn't normal. And even when other types of abuse are recognized, parental alienation, which affects a lot of parents going through high conflict divorce, still might not be. So the impact of alienation on families can be absolutely devastating. But there's a lot you can do about it if you recognize what's going on. So in this webinar, we're going to get into common behaviors and attitudes in toxic relationships, how to identify parental alienation, what matters to family court when it comes to alienation and why, and how to properly document for an alienation case so you can save time, money, and energy with an attorney. So just a quick note, in the confirmation email we sent out, there was a link to our toxic relationship quiz, but we had some technical stuff going on and that link changed. So apologies for the inconvenience. As soon as we get into the main part of the webinar, I'll put the new link in the chat. And I think, Charlie, you also said it'll be in the follow-up materials as well. So we'll get to that in a couple minutes. But this quiz that we created, it's long. It's like 33 questions long. And just in the first year, we had more than 40,000 people take it. And we were a bit surprised to find that almost everyone who started it finished it, all 33 questions. And very few people had middle of the road results. So most scored very high, and some scored very low. In other words, they didn't have the problem that we're all familiar with. And it really shows how consistent the behaviors of toxic personality types are. Right, Lisa?
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, that's why we did the quiz, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember the conversation with you, and like people didn't recognize it. A lot of the people we were talking to didn't realize when they were still in it that, oh my gosh, I'm in an abusive relationship. And Lisa and I didn't realize it ourselves at the time. But once you learn about these behaviors, it's, as I said, it's remarkable how consistent they are. So if you get one of the behaviors, you tend to get most of them. They come in a bundle. And some of the questions in the quiz tie to behaviors that really show up when it comes to alienation.
Yeah. So Chris will send that link again later because we don't want to distract and have you taking it at the same time. But just two questions I want to talk about. One is, does your partner belittle your friends and family members? So when Chris and I made this quiz a few years ago, we just talked about how a high conflict ex will often trivialize your relationship with other people that care about you to elevate their own importance in your life. But after writing our book that's coming out and doing so much research on parental alienation, I was thinking how this also lays the foundation for what's called hatred by association. And that's something where, as your ex is brainwashing your child that you're this terrible person, often kids are affected by not wanting anything to do with anyone associated with you. So that term is called hatred by association. That will come up a lot in the future. Another question is from the quiz was, does your ex act like he or she is more capable than you making decisions? And Chris and I work with people dealing with the legal system a lot. We specialize in something called legal abuse, where your ex is using the legal system to wear you down and bleed you dry financially. And so most people that we work with have children and they are putting together parenting plans. In parenting plans, legal decision making about the four major areas: health, including mental health, education, religion, and extracurriculars, is really important. And the default seems to be joint legal decision making, which is very, very difficult when you're dealing with a toxic ex. So when you're dealing with someone while you're still together and that person is acting like they're more capable than you of making decisions, you have to really keep an eye on that because as you put a parenting plan together, knowing how manipulative they are, they might convince you that since they've always done it, that they can keep doing it and that everything's fine, that you should trust that they're going to do the right thing. But Chris and I call it the crown jewel to have legal decision making if you become a tiebreaker. So make sure that if your ex is pushing you to give up legal decision making, that you do not give it up if you can keep it at least at joint. So those are the two questions I think you'll recognize in the quiz. There's more, but that lay that foundation for alienation that we really do need to pay attention to.
Mm.
All right, so Charlie, you haven't even had a chance to say anything yet.
That's absolutely fine. I think it's great listening to all the stuff, the amazing work that you've both done about this quiz, because I think it's so important for parents to recognize what they've been through. And just like both of you, I would stick my hand up and say, yep, I went through abuse as well. And it comes in so many different forms. I mean, it comes in, as you say, the kind of financial form. You can kind of put somebody under a lot of duress. You can get them into debt. You can stop them making decisions. Um, yeah, it's kind of like psychological. It can be sexual. It comes in so many different formats. Some of it's really subtle,
Yeah.
and
So
it
I
leaves
go
us
ahead,
in this
Charlie.
debilitated state where, it creates self-doubt. It makes us very nervous. It's a very conflictory way of dealing with us as well. I mean, the whole thing is just horrible. But when you recognize it, which I think your quiz is brilliant for, it's very educational and it's very healing because you can start going, oh, okay, I actually went through this. This is stuff I need to address.
Yeah, I mean the validation part, I think that's why so many people finish the quiz because as they're going along, they're like, oh my gosh, this is me.
Mm,
This
mm.
is my situation. But Charlie, I want you to tell us, since we did say that basically one in two people in abusive relationships don't even recognize that they're in them, what are some toxic behaviors that you see the kids experiencing? Because we know we were victims, we hopefully got out, but the kids are still stuck in these relationships. And what are some of the invisible forms of psychological abuse that again you see with your community of people dealing with this?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because there's probably somewhere between kind of 15 and 18 very common themes that I see. So I won't go through all of them because there's too many. But when I'm kind of helping people, we go through the whole lot because you can help to kind of like come up with what I call an FBI profile on your kid and see what they've gone through. But some of the classic stuff, like so loyalty conflict is a big one. So the child is being asked to make a choice between one parent who's loving and available with another parent who's putting all the pressure on them. And that loyalty conflict will come back to that later on as well when we're talking about healing, because it goes against the child's innate kind of sense of wanting to have a relationship with both parents. So that's one sort of psychological abuse. Um, there's things like coercion, so that they're constantly that there's consequences to not appeasing alienators. So the kids are always having to make that alienator happy. We see things like false choices. So this is where a kid will be asked, do you want to see your mom? Do you want to see your dad? You decide. And although that sounds relatively innocuous, it's giving the kid responsibilities that are putting a lot of pressure on it, and stuff that the kids should never be asked to do. Um, and in doing so as well, it gives the alienating parent an opportunity to say things like, "Well, I asked, Ryan or I asked Tom, did they want to see you?" And they said no. And so, I can't force them to see you. But they'll also get the kids to express these false choices in courts because they're not really a choice that the kids have. That will lead in with parentification as well. So they're showing kids legal documentation, financial documentation. This is all going on during that divorce process, and involving them in matters that children just shouldn't be included in. We also see kids becoming very rude and rejecting of the parent, and that's really a coping mechanism on the child's part. There's things like cognitive dissonance. There's things like enmeshment. Kind of the list goes on, but you end up with this kid who's very disorientated, feeling very unsafe, and ends up being very rude with us or ultimately rejecting us and going no contact with us as a result of all this pressure that's being put on them. That's kind of
Yeah.
a whirlwind tour explanation of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so detailed, but what you're describing is exactly what so many of our clients deal with all the time.
Mm, mm. And
Yeah.
a lot of the abusive behaviors that an abuser inflicts on a parent, they do the same sorts of things to the children as well. So there'll be a lot of subtle criticisms. Um, if the kids are doing something that the abuser doesn't like, they'll punish them in very subtle ways. It could be as simple as taking things away from them. It could be a threat of taking their love away from them. It could be taking some of their privileges away or just embarrassing them in front of friends. It's a huge array of kind of psychological abuse that's available to the alienators and these abusers.
Yeah, I find myself wanting to go into detail for so many things, but I know there's a lot of stuff that we want to cover. I know money is a big part of this as well.
Yeah, huge. Well, so I mean, money is a trigger for the people who have these sorts of characteristics, who are the abusers, who are the alienators, because it's one of the things that makes them feel fundamentally unsafe. So they tend to dial up the abuse and to dial up the alienation. When they're going to court, they dial up the abuse and the alienation as well. During the separation process, the same thing happens. Um, but I'm really interested to understand from your perspective as well. How does how does the impact of psychological abuse on the kid affect custody? Because we're having to deal with it in the court system as well.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think first of all, people talk about psychological abuse, and all of our clients are victim survivors of domestic violence. And one thing that we often have to remind them is that in most parts of the world, the courts really do separate domestic abuse, which includes psychological abuse, from custody. There's a number of different factors that we'll get into, including the alienation factors, as to what you really need to document. But we have to remember that when it comes to custody, generally the courts don't want to hear about what the ex did to us. And I think people get tripped up because they're like, I want to show how what they did to me is so bad and how they're doing it to the kid. You need to basically put your own stuff aside and focus on the visible impact on your children when it comes to custody. So, one of what visible impact means, it has to be significant. So, what the courts want to see is a change in a child's behavior because sometimes we can't just point to one thing, but you want your child, you don't want it to happen, but if you are documenting, you want to think about things with their health, like what has changed. So
Mm,
we interview custody evaluators and lawyers all the time. And when it comes to health, they want to see, has a child started regressing? Are they acting a lot younger than they used to be? Does it seem like developmentally they've gone backward
mm,
instead of forward? We see things with them, like wetting the bed is really, really common. A lot of self-harming behaviors. Unfortunately, we see a lot of suicidal ideation where kids are threatening to hurt themselves. One of our clients right now, unfortunately, their schedule changed and they're spending more time with the abusive parent. And our client's daughter has started banging her head against the wall a lot and
wow.
scratching herself. And so these are things that, I mean, luckily the doctor has noticed, their guardian ad litem, who's the evaluator, has noticed, and I think the child's therapist has noticed as well. So that's something that is significant because it's provable, it's visible, and it's not just our client reporting those kinds of
Those
behaviors.
issues. Just on the health thing before covering the other aspects, are you seeing a high propensity of or a high degree of uh, diagnosis around autism and ADHD?
Oh my gosh, all the time. Like ADHD is an anxiety disorder. I think most people that we meet, our own clients, have some, they say, I've been diagnosed with ADHD or I have ADHD. I feel like every other client's child has ADHD.
Mhm.
And ADHD is not a permanent diagnosis. It's again, it's an anxiety disorder, so it can come and go, but
Yeah.
very, very high levels of anxiety. Mhm.
Because somebody, Mel Gill, she works with attachment theory. She's kind of a specialist in that area, and so trained psychologist. And she was saying that autism is constantly being diagnosed as well.
Mhm.
But the kind of genuine autism is something that normally gets picked up before a child is one.
Hmm.
So she believes that the sort of autism that is being currently diagnosed isn't really autism, it's another trauma response, a bit like the ADHD.
Hmm.
But you're seeing it all the time, I'm seeing it all
All
the
the
time.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that this is really the that psychological abuse. So what are the other things apart from health that people should be kind of noting down when they're trying to prove psychological abuse?
So school, so grades are suffering. Teachers are noticing that they're not sleeping. They're noticing more aggressive behaviors in how they're interacting with other adults at school or other kids. They're getting in fights more often. Extracurriculars where they're dropping out of activities. We see kids just isolating and they suddenly don't feel like doing what they used to do anymore. Yeah, like again, the same kinds of behaviors that maybe you experienced in the relationship on a different level, like they're hurting themselves, they're isolating, they're not participating. And again, it's like almost like a different child. And so what's important is to have other adults involved with your child. I think I was interviewing an attorney from Florida named Charles Jameson, and he said that because our world is full of when I say our, I mean Chris is in our community is full of false allegations. And
Hmm.
so Charles said that when your kids are around other adults, like getting them involved in more activities and around other adults, that the abuse will come out. So this other people will see it and notice it, and that makes your documentation stronger for court because you could call possibly these people as witnesses if you had to. It's not as strong if you, the parent, see it. So let's say you suspect sexual abuse. It's
Hmm.
not a good idea for you to call CPS yourself, especially in the midst of a high conflict divorce or separation or custody battle. But if somebody else reports it, like the child's pediatrician, or you take the child to the emergency room right away, the court is always going to come after you, like opposing counsel, and say, well, if you suspected it, why didn't you do something right away? So you always want to go to a doctor or a hospital or something to get someone to record it that you could use later for documentation, not just rely on your own impression or what the child told you.
That's a really good point because also it avoids the accusations, well, false allegations, which comes up all the time in alienation. Again, it's just another form of psychological abuse. To
Mhm.
be turning around and accusing somebody of normally it's the person doing it that's accusing the other party of the psychological abuse or even the sexual abuse. But
Yeah,
I think that
projection.
that yeah, that's great. Just going off and finding somebody independently to report it.
Mhm.
How about because that's kind of with the kids. You said a few minutes ago, don't involve yourself, but should we be trying to prove that our ex has abused us psychologically in court as well?
Not for custody. No.
Not for custody.
Yeah,
So
people say,
avoid
"Oh,
that.
the judge doesn't care." Well, it's not that I mean, the judge doesn't care because that's not a custody issue. So there's a number of factors. You often hear them called best interest factors that are very specific, and none of them have anything to do with you. Now, one of them actually is which parent is likely to support the child's relationship with the other parent, and is one parent undermining that relationship? That means something, but again, that's not how you were psychologically abused. That's more of how the your ex might be interfering with your ability to parent.
Mm. Okay, yeah, it's a subtle but important difference. So if you, I mean, can you argue that your ex is being abusive and they could hurt your child, and can you have clauses or something put in the plans to kind of apprehend this in advance? I get,
Yes.
stop stuff before it
Yeah.
happens.
Yes. Okay, so first of all, you can't, so the courts tend to be overall, and you know we have clients all over the world, they tend to be reactive rather than proactive. So you can't go in and saying, I'm really worried that my ex, for example, not just psychological abuse, my ex is an alcoholic and they might get in an accident with our kids. If there's no documented, really powerful proof, that's
Mm,
going to be tricky to get in court. So it's the same thing with psychological abuse. You can't say, I think my ex is going to do something, but what you can do is put what's called a therapy clause in your parenting plan. And this idea I got from a New York City attorney named Yoni Leveretz, who said that if you put something in your parenting plan, in your agreement ahead of time that says something like, if ever either parent or the child themselves want to get therapy, then it's not considered a separate major decision. It just happens. So normally in our community, that's part of joint legal decision making. It can be really, really difficult because we know our exes don't want the kids to get therapy. They don't want to be exposed, all of that. And so they end up blocking therapy, firing the kids' therapists, etc. But if you put something, a clause in your parenting plan ahead of time that seems very reasonable and that most people would support, like because the courts do generally support mental health, kids getting help with that, especially during a separation and divorce, you just put it in at the same time and say, look, if any of us need it, we should be able to go without a big discussion. Then that's one of your best protections for dealing with the psychological abuse and alienation, and also having what Chris and I call more eyes on the case. So again, just like with extracurriculars, then you have other professionals like kids therapists who are paying attention.
yeah, excellent. And is that something that's fairly universal in terms of in the way that we can do this in courts?
hmm And
Yeah.
that's why a parenting plan is so important. And I know Chris is off screen, but he's like the king. He's of writing airtight parenting plans. And it's so important to get it right from the beginning, where there's no loopholes, because we already know that your ex is going to try to take advantage of the language. So you want to have really clear language with enforcement, deadlines, consequences, so that not if you go back to court, when you go back to court, you want to make it really, really easy for a judge to do their job.
Mm. I think this was something that we'd covered in a separate discussion, not actually part of kind of the series, but we were just talking about being able to help people at a really early stage in kind
Mhm.
of that separation and divorce, because we know the playbooks. We know what these people are going to do, and they're so predictable. They all do the same stuff, and it comes as a shock to us as the people who are kind of the victims, to think that the exes who we've known, we've been married to for sometimes decades, that these people become completely different. The mask slips off. They start doing things against us very intentionally. A lot of it is they give us the impression that we don't need a parenting plan.
Oh,
They give us the impression that they'll stay in the house for a little bit, and then they'll relinquish it, but that they're just setting us up for a fall. And so,
yeah.
if anybody's going through this and they're in the early stages, please, please, please get help, because we can help navigate this to have a completely different outcome.
Right. I mean, be ready for them to be like, this is what Chris's ex did, is like, we're still going to be a family. We're still going to have dinners together, birthday parties. We're going to do stuff. Just
Mm,
sign right here.
yeah, yeah. And I think for anybody who's dealing with these abusers, if they're being nice, be wary. Because they're just doing it to the point in time they get what they want from you, then they go back to being themselves, having kind of just basically coerced you. It's just another form of manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, Charlie, why don't you talk about some of those alienators?
The mechanisms that your alienating ex is using to control your kids. There are some common ones, but it tends to be Are they, and most of these people are narcissists, by the way, we'll just throw that out there. It's a generalist term, overused, but generally, but it seems to be the case. Um, so they'll do things like their love is very conditional for the child. So we see parents who are like very, very relaxed about boundaries. So one of the ways in which they control the kids is they have no boundaries. So the kids can do anything, but then it's conditional. So if the kids displease them, then they take away, the right to stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning, or they'll take away the video games. The biggest thing that they use their conditionality on is their love. So very often these children are ignored, or um, that they're just not parented, and the child is looking for this from that parent. So it's a bit like being in a cult. Unless you're constantly appeasing the leader of the cult, you'll get thrown out. And the children in that family who are a bit stronger and who are standing up to that parent will often be excluded from activities because they're not playing ball. And it kind of sets an example for all the other kids. Criticism is another way of kind of holding on to the kids, putting them down, or the other side of that, love bombing them. But what we see the kids, and we I talked before about the loyalty conflict. I mean, that's a major part of it. But there's this very subtle enmeshment that goes on, and we mentioned earlier that very often the alienation begins, when the children are born, and there's this kind of subtle undermining of the other parent about them being somehow a second-class citizen compared to us, also compared to the alienator. So it's like our rules don't count. All the things that we try to do for parenting don't count. We're always the bad guy. And I use the expression, or not the expression, the analogy of a volcano. So what's happening is that the kids are having all this pressure put on them bit by bit by bit by bit, and it's not always visible. And we're the parent just looking at the outside of the volcano. And we don't know stuff is going on until smoke starts appearing, or until the whole thing blows up and there's lava going everywhere. And then we're trying to kind of react to what's already happened.
Mhm.
But the alienators kind of, and that's the pre-alienation stuff again, the alienator's just laying those foundations down very early on.
Yeah, actually, one of the things you said about making it as though you, the targeted parent, are a second-class citizen fits in with one of the alienation factors, which is to minimize your authority, to make
Mm.
it seem like they're the main parent and they're the only real parent and they're the ones that should be listened to and not you. It's almost as though you have no power in your own house.
Absolutely. And the way that the kids manifest this, so I always talk about safety, and we'll be talking about adult safety in a moment, but um, it really undermines the kids' sense of security. So they don't really have sanctuary even in their own household. Whether or not we're in it, if it's at the point in time we're in the house with them, there's a lot of tension in the household a lot of the time. We tend to be what I call the regulators. We're trying to keep everything on an even keel. We're trying to keep the abuser kind of calm. We're trying to take the pressure off the kids. And that's one of the things that happens to the kids when we leave that relationship because we've been too compromised, and we psychologically can't stand it any further. Very often one of the kids becomes the new regulator, and that's another one of the parentification experiences that they have. And so often parents will see a child, it's normally either the older child or the favored child becomes the new consort, or like almost like partner for the alienator. And then that child is the new parent. And they're not just the parent in the alienator's home, but they try to exercise the same sort of power in our household. And then we find that kid is trying to parent us as well,
Mm.
because they're not because part of that is part of the deal is that they often having to parent the alienator, who are very immature, infantile people a lot of the time. They're not very often the time they're not good at kind of running households or just keeping some stability for the other children together. So a child becomes that person, but we also see all manner of other things. So um, the it's the way that a child experiences it's through their coping mechanisms in many ways. So we'll see them not answering texts because they're afraid, because it's a fear-based relationship with the parent. Um, they might receive text and you might see them opening them. That's good, but they might not answer them. They might cut you off completely, so you have no idea that you're reading them. I was also introduced to something recently called Mail Suite, and I'm singing its praises. If nobody's if you're using email to contact your kids and you don't know if they're opening it or not, Mail Suite is an application that works for Gmail, and it will let you see if the kids opened it. Because at least with text and with WhatsApp and other things, you can see if the kid has actually opened your communication or not, which is really helpful. But all the other things they show us, the lack of respect, the rudeness, the entitlement, uh, the lack they might call you by your first name instead of calling you mom or dad, um, their silence, they'll go and spend time in their rooms. These are all just ways in which the kids are trying to keep themselves safe. And so, as part of learning about alienation for any parent, once you understand what the child's going through and why they're doing these things, you can look beyond those behaviors because as parents, we take all this stuff really personally. And instead, we want to be able to say, okay, I know why you're doing that. You're being rude because it's a coping mechanism, especially when they're in the company of the alienating parent, because they're completely different kids at that point in time. But again, if you can see through that and go, you're just feeling really unsafe. I understand why you're doing that. I know that the version of you, my kid that I love, is still there. And equally, the version of the kid that loves me is still there. They're just hiding in the shadows.
Yeah. Oh my
All
gosh.
what's
What
going on.
great description. Now, also, we often hear about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And there's a book that I just started reading called Fawning by Dr. Ingrid Clayton. And it's really interesting, Charlie, how you mentioned how the one parent, let's say you, while you're still in the relationship, you're the regulator. And when you say that word regulate, I'm thinking that a lot of it matches fawning behaviors that we ourselves did in the relationship to keep everyone as safe as possible. And so, if anyone's interested, I mean, I'm only halfway through the book, but it's pretty fascinating, like how we learn to be very adaptable to keep the peace and to keep things safe, even post separation, and how our kids are doing the exact same thing. The other thing was you mentioned Mail Suite, Charlie, and I think you need to mention how you told me a story about how a lot of times people think their kid isn't looking at anything, especially when they've been years apart. You want to share what
Yeah,
you
yeah. So um, there's one of the dads who was using this. He hasn't really had contact with his kid for a couple of years now, but has been sending emails. And he was really surprised because he discovered that he can see when the email was sent, you can see when the email was opened, and you can also see how many times it was opened. And what he noticed is that his kid was opening the email within 2 minutes of receiving it, on average. And the kid was reading all of them. The other thing he found was the kid was often opening them at kind of 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So obviously, kind of reflecting on what was happening in the relationship with his father. Um, and so it just gives hope and insight that, these are kids that still love us, but they're so afraid of the alienator that they don't feel that they can respond. And
Yeah.
it just gives us hope that, yes, they still love me. I just have to wait until they're ready to engage with me again.
Yeah, for sure. So I know we want to talk about a few other things. So it's like I knew we were probably going to run out of time, and we
Yes.
definitely want to leave a few minutes at the end. I can't see it now, but I think Chris might have put a message in about putting questions in. But Charlie, can you talk a little bit about what parents themselves are experiencing? So we talked about what it's like for kids, but many people here are targeted parents, and m most people experiencing this say it's like the worst thing that they ever could not have imagined would happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've borrowed from Dr. Kubler-Ross something. She actually uses it as a bereavement curve. It's I call it just the change curve, because bereavement and alienation are so similar, and the process, the emotional journey that we go through is almost identical. So it starts with shock and denial, then we go through anger, we go through bargaining, which is basically saying, dear God, if you do this, I'll do that. Then there's depression, which I prefer to use the term sadness rather than depression. And then there's acceptance before we start getting on with our lives. And the reason that it's so helpful to know that emotional journey is you can kind of say, where am I at the moment? And you'll kind of gravitate to certain phases, but you're going to move around at the same time. You don't stay static. So it's really helpful to recognize where you are, but also things will move you back. So there are triggers. So triggers can be somebody asks you how your kid is, that'll trigger you. Seeing another parent with a kid of the same age, that'll trigger you. Seeing people being happy families, that'll trigger you. Seeing happy families on TV, that'll trigger you. Your child being rude to you will trigger you. Your child talking about your ex will trigger you. And I find that generally most people have about 50 to 100 different triggers. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, once you start writing all these things down, it's incredibly subtle. So there's not just triggers, there's blockers, which are another form of trigger. So the blockers are, what is the stuff that I haven't been able to accept in my own heart yet? So a really good example of a blocker is you can see the painful the painful experience that your kid is going through, um, but you don't want to kind of accept the fact that they are having to go through this. And we find it really difficult to be able to say to ourselves, okay, this is real. This is my reality right now. And the reason we don't want to do that is because it's like we're giving up hope. So what I always say to people is my version of acceptance is it's just acceptance for a point in time for a specified period. We don't know how long that period is going to be, but it's just for a period of time. And after that, there is the hope that we'll reunite with our kids. But those blockers stop us moving into the acceptance phase. And if we're not in the acceptance phase, it hurts us. So it's kind of like a trigger. There's also expectation gaps. So when our kids are born, we map out very quickly in our head what their lives are going to be like. And we kind of typically do this to their mid-20s, mid-30s. And we've set out, what's going to happen to them, what they're going to be like at their proms, at their graduation, any important events in school, when they get married, all the stuff if they're a kid. And what we're actually doing a lot of the time is we're trying to fix our own childhood. So we're trying to create a childhood for our own children that addresses all the bad things that happened to us when we were growing up. And what now happens is we've got all these expectations, which we've invented, by the way. They're not real. We just invented them, but we nurture them, we love them, and we kind of cherish them. And then the alienators come along, and how we anticipated our lives with our children as being is now completely different. So this is another big pain point for us. So again, I encourage people to make notes of, what are all these expectation gaps that are so subtly there, but I'm not even aware of them. And then there's also how we've been criticized and judged by the people around us as we were growing up as parents. And there's tons of it. It's, did I look good enough? Was I smart enough? Was I social enough? Was I the right height? Was my body the right type? Religious stuff. There's this whole belief framework that we have. And so much of it is coming from other people's limited perspectives of themselves, which they've passed on to us, normally from our parents. And when you pull all of those things together, you suddenly realize you've got all these pain points, and they manifest themselves because they all make you feel unsafe. They manifest themselves when you're trying to have a relationship with your kids. Because if your kid comes up to you and they're rude, that trigger is normally something related to you when you were really, really young. And so the bad news is you're going to have a lot of them. The good news is if you know what each one is, you can deal with it. And this is that kind of whole self-healing part that we I think we probably don't have time for the whole self-healing thing today, but we should definitely come back to that in another series because it's worth spending a few minutes on that alone. Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say as we're like moving towards the last part of this, if any of you have ideas of what you want to see us talk about, like for example, Charlie talking about the self-healing, just put it in the chat and we'll plan on that for a future thing. But Charlie, also when you mentioned the expectations, I think a lot of our clients are having a really hard time with the milestones, with graduations that happened a few months ago, with kids going off to school, college specifically, and missing out and being absolutely heartbroken
yeah.
and feeling like they remember when they went off to college and now they've missed out and the kids away and I'm never going to get them back. So I'm really glad that you talked about that.
I mean, that fits perfectly into the expectation gap space. And also, I talked previously about nine emotions, one of which is injustice.
Hmm.
And injustice is not just about the court system failing to protect your kids, but it's also the sense of my kid doesn't know who I am.
Hmm.
I have not had the opportunity to share my values, share what's important, try to protect them, try to ensure they didn't make the same mistakes that I made when I was growing up. But that sense of injustice, it's very deep in most parents. The good news is you can do a lot to influence your kid, which again we'll cover on another session. But there's so much you can do to influence your kid in far subtler ways when you're this alienated parent and a lot of your kind of parenting capability has been diminished. But there's lots you can do. We will cover that. But I think it's all while we're talking about the alienation, I mean, it's good to also to know what else people can do when they're trying to respond to alienation with the court process. How do they prepare for this?
Yeah, so I think what we can do, Charlie, is get into those six alienation factors. And this is something that I go into deeply when we're working directly with our clients, because of course they're big topics. And then as we do our next webinar, we'll just pick up and go more deeply into each factor. But when you're documenting for court, like I mentioned earlier, that first best interest factor or child custody factor is which parent is likely to support the child's relationship with the other parent. And the flip side is one parent, so we know our exes, undermining our relationship with our child. So there's six ways that they generally do this, and these are the factors that we use when we help our clients basically put together a narrative for court. Now, there's 10 custody factors generally and six alienation factors. It's not like you need evidence in 16 areas or even the six alienation factors. There's usually like one to three that are your major themes that we want you to start putting evidence into. So the first alienation factor is that one parent is sending poisonous messages about you to your child. And I think I talked about this and not in a webinar together with you, Charlie, but one Chris and I did like a couple of years ago. And we call it the three U's, that you're unsafe, unloving, and or unavailable. And these don't have to be said directly, but just sense like your ex's body language, the way they roll their eyes, the way they act during exchanges, all of that impacts how a child is affected. And we also work with our own clients to say your child is absorbing your own energy. So you have to be very, very careful, as you're doing exchanges or as you call them, Charlie, handovers.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
but anyway, so that's one of the most common things we see. That seems to be more common than the other alienation factors all put together. But sending poisonous messages. The second one is blocking contact and communication. That is something that we can really deal with more easily in the legal system because when somebody is blocking contact and communication, it's obvious and it's easier to document. So basically, that looks like somebody not following an agreement or parenting plan. And like you said, Charlie, if they're saying, well, the kid doesn't want to go with you or they have other activities, why don't you just be reasonable and basically give up your access time? That's something to note, and it is not something to just give away for nothing. And that's something we'll get into next time when we meet again. But notice if your ex is not following parenting plans like physical access time, court-ordered phone calls or FaceTimes. And also, contact and communication is not just with the parent directly, but with other providers or people involved with your child that affect major decisions. So, for example, school records, both your names should be on those records, not just your ex's. And we see they'll often boot you out of there and be like, "Oh,
Mm.
I couldn't figure it out, and I had to just pick one parent." Your name has to be on all school records, all medical records, and also on extracurriculars list. Because let's say that you're not on an email or text chain of when your child's having an event and you don't show up, for example, to a school play because you didn't know about it. That is indirectly sending the child the message that you are uninvolved, so therefore you don't care. So it's continuing that alienator's message just by that blocking of your communication with other people.
And
Charlie,
just to jump in there for a second, so it sounds like you've got another couple there.
Mhm.
Um, can you, and it comes back to that question, can you have this stuff put in the plan? Because this is classic alienator territory. They cut you out from the schools, they cut you out from doctors, dentists, just having any understanding of what's going on in your kid's life. So, I mean, if parents can include that in the plan, that is an enormous win.
Yes. So write that down, Charlie and Chris, to talk about that next time when we really go deeply into the different factors. Yeah, there's definitely things you can do. Again, with that enforcement language, deadlines, consequences. All right, I'm going to rush through the last few because I know we're getting low on time and people want to ask questions. The third one is erasing and replacing, making it as though your role in your child's life was not as significant as it actually was, minimizing you, having your child call, or let's say they got remarried or with a new partner, having your child call their new partner mommy or daddy. That should never happen. um, but erasing and replacing, again, acting like they're the main parent, and in a variety of ways, which we'll get into next time, acting like you were, again, meaningless. Okay, fourth factor, encouraging a child to betray your trust. So turning a child into a little spy. So when they see you, they're reporting back to the other parent what's going on in your household. They're looking into your phone, possibly if they're older, getting into your computer, taking photographs of what's going on in your house and being rewarded by reporting back to that alienating parent. The next one is the one that I mentioned earlier, number five, minimizing your authority. So acting like they're the main parent and you're just secondary, or what is it called, Chris? A non-player. What's that video game term? Oh my God,
Not
NPC.
non-player character.
Yeah, non-player
Mm.
character. Right.
It's like I was thinking of Star Trek this morning and how it was always those random red shirt guys you knew were going to get killed. They were just the extras.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, acting like you were really nothing. And then the last one is encouraging a child's dependence. So as healthy parents, we know we want our children to love us, but we want them to learn to be independent and go on to live their own lives. Narcissistic parents or alienators want the opposite. They require the children to be their supply. So often they will make children, they'll treat children as if they're younger. So, Charlie, you talked about parentification. A lot of them do what's called infantilization, where
Mm.
they'll act like they're not capable. You don't know what to do. And we see in children, kids who think, well, I don't know. I can't make a decision for myself. I need to ask mom or dad. Or I can't do what I want because if I don't do what mom or dad wants, they're not going to pay for my car. They're not going to pay for my
Mm.
college. So I basically have to go along with their wishes and desires. So anyway, I know we just scratched the surface of
Yeah,
those
yeah,
factors.
yeah.
I think we'll
Can
continue the next time. Go ahead, Charlie.
if I could just add on to that infantilizers, blah, 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 I can't say the word anymore.
Infantilization.
Infantilization, yeah. Um, we also see that a lot happening, not just coming from the alienator, but the pressure that's coming. It's not just the alienator infantilizing them.
Mhm.
The kid, the pressure being put on the kid also gets them to go through this kind of regressive, um, behaviors, and it's another safety mechanism for them to kind of revert back to a point in time when they didn't have this pressure on them. So it's a really big theme that comes up. Um, and also it takes away a lot of the kids' kind of maturity and also their ability to make decisions.
Hmm.
So they've got this false choice and they've got no ability to really be comfortable making decisions. It's terrible what goes on. But we should probably do some questions. I just wanted to pop there and saying, yeah, it's like we completely see all this stuff.
Yep. All right, Chris.
Chris,
All right. So thanks, guys. That was really awesome. And we have a couple of questions that come from the chat. And the first one, actually, these are both very, very familiar things in my work and Lisa's work with our clients. And the first one, and with apologies to the person who put this, I'm going to broaden it out a little bit because you asked it kind of specifically, but it has to do with a child who clearly is being alienated, is aligning with the other parent, and is saying, mom or dad, whoever the parent who's the target of the alienation is, I don't like this. I didn't, you need to do this or you need to do that, or I'm leaving. I'm going over to the other parent's house. And then you can't physically restrain a child who's like starting to get big. They will get out of the house if they want to get out of the house. So what do you do in that circumstance where the threats to leave are being weaponized, and then sometimes they do leave, and how do we handle that properly?
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
I was going to say, this happens a lot. I mean, a lot of it's down really to the age of the child in terms of trying to deal with it as a parent, kind of psychologically. Um, if the child is a bit older, a lot of the time they will just leave. And the police don't really want to get involved because they say this is a civil matter rather than a criminal matter. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's a bit sort of hit and miss. Um, I encourage parents as much as possible to uh, just try and be as loving as you can with the child because basically when they're showing those behaviors, they're feeling really uneasy, they're feeling really unsafe. And it would be better if you have a kid in your house, in their room, shutting themselves off, just being away from that alienating parent, rather than, getting into an argument with them, with them getting upset with your boundaries and stuff like that, and them leaving the house. But it's a really tough situation for parents who've got these severely alienated children spending time with them because it can feel like a constant battle. And I think the top tip is try not to engage the child in these battles because the child is quite often trying to create arguments to create an excuse to go back to the alienating parent, or they're just trying to protect themselves. But if you can as best you can recognize that these are these coping mechanisms, that they're being difficult with you because they're feeling unsafe. And if they see you feeling unsafe and if they get a reaction from you, you're just escalating it. And what they need for you is to be that very grounded parent who is just constantly feeling safe in yourself so you can give the kid comfort that, like, I'm safe, you're in a safe environment. I'm just going to give you love, care, support. I don't care what you do, that's all you're going to get back. I know how difficult it is in reality for parents to do, but that in summary is kind of what I would advocate. But maybe there's for you, Lisa, maybe you've got other views and also what you can do from a legal perspective.
No, I love your answer, Charlie. I mean, legally, it's tricky. It depends on a few things.
Hmm.
You could always, yeah, it's you could write to the other parent, but that's still ignoring your child's feelings. I love what you said about maybe coming up with some options ahead of time when there's going to be an explosion, just to try to calm things down and maybe give them some choices over what they can do and not offer going to the other parent's house as a choice.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, change your boundaries. I mean, parents come across some really hard stuff. So,
mm,
video games is a classic one of kids wanting to stay up because it's addictive. They want to stay up all night playing video games, which they're allowed to do in the other person's house.
all the
And
time.
and when you start putting boundaries in place, I've literally seen parents lose their kids to video games because the kids will, because they're addicted and they've got the alienation, they will go and leave your property in order to go and be with the alienating parent. And also,
Mm.
it's a bit of careful what you wish for, because when you do get your kids back, you can end up with very toxified kids. And that can be enormously stressful for you as a parent and everybody else in the household as well. And this is why it's so important for us to be in such a good space, because we have to be the strong one for our child as well as for ourselves. But yeah, and still, it's a double-edged sword. It's still much better to have the kid in your house being difficult, being with you, where they can experience you for who you really are, rather than yielding ground and letting them go and spend any time as much as you can. Don't let as much as you can limit the amount of time they're spending with the alienating parent.
And I have to agree with Lisa, Charlie. I like that a lot better than any legal answer, right?
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah. Chris, do you
Um,
want to just do one more question? Because I know
yeah,
we're almost out of
just
time, and then we'll carry on next time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say we're with apologies, we'll go just a minute or two past the top of the hour, but I wanted to get this other one in. And this is a case where a child and the alienating parent have aligned. There's some kind of false accusation. They made up, something you were disrespectful to whoever, and they're now together demanding an apology as a condition, like to come back or to, they're just saying you must apologize. How would you handle a situation like that?
Oh, Charlie, this is you too.
That's a real toughie as well, because I try to discourage parents from apologizing for stuff they haven't done, because the kids have already got these false memories, and to then enhance that by saying, well, somehow, yes, I did something I didn't actually do, it completely undermines your position with the alienator, because they'll just keep on, they'll do more and more.
And Charlie, I'm sorry for interrupting, but let me add that part of the question was the person asking it said, I apologize for how that made them feel,
Yes.
right? But they didn't apologize for the thing that didn't really happen. So
So yeah,
like talking
that
about.
you can. So there's a couple of different things going on. Sometimes the child is genuinely looking for an apology. Sometimes the child is just looking for you to validate their experience. And if they're looking for you to validate their experience, what they're actually doing is they're reaching out to you, and they're kind of starting the reuniting process. But often it manifests itself in them having to get off their chest what they felt they had experienced. And they kind of don't necessarily want you to apologize in some instances. They just want you to listen. But in other
Hmm.
instances, that they're more vitriolic about it and they say, I want you to apologize. That's where I would kind of be a bit, I would dodge the bullet by subtly asking them questions, like, tell me more about that. I'm sorry that you feel that way. Or, try to keep validating them. Talk about the experience. So tell me more about it. How was that for you? What could we have done better? Those sorts of questions. And it's, even though you're not apologizing, it feels like you're engaging with what the child is saying. And if it's something that push comes to shove, you absolutely shouldn't apologize for, then it's within reason. Once you've gone through the process of empathizing with them, you can say that that's not the experience that I had. If you absolutely are being put in a space that they're seeking the apology, say, look, I'm really sorry you had that experience, but I have a different memory of that experience. I don't necessarily remember that.
Yeah, brilliant. I was writing down approach with curiosity.
Mm, yeah, I mean,
They
and
want your attention.
and this stuff can be bottled up for years. And just
Mm.
sharing something personal, my one of my children was more alienated than the other. And only, God, it was about a month ago, she let rip at me. I mean, we've got a good relationship again, and boy, did she have a go at me. And I had to do exactly what I train everybody else to do. I had to sit there and let her vent. And what she was doing is she was just getting all this toxicity out of her system. And she'd been wanting to talk about it, but she clearly hadn't felt, safe enough and confident enough to do it until that point. And I hadn't heard her talk like that for years and years and years. And again, I just did exactly the same stuff. I embraced the conversation with her. And the next day, it was like a completely different person because I'd given her that space and I'd validated her story and I'd listened to her. And it was like she had a big smile and she was really happy. And even immediately after the conversation, you could see the sense of relief on her face. It was really visible.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mm.
It's hard. I know we all, well, Chris, me and you train other people, and sometimes in the moment it's hard to remember what we teach because we all get emotional.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I know that. I mean, that was a decade after the alienation stopped. I know that there's another 5 to 10 years to go of this stuff for me personally, where they still need to kind of let go of it, let go of it, let go of it. And I'm ready for it, yeah, because I love them and I know they love me and they just need to unleash this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Sorry we didn't get to everything, but we will continue. We'll probably pick up with the alienation factors next time. And again, if you didn't think of something that you think we should cover, you can put it in the chat or just write to us later. And for Chris and I, our emails are Lisa or Chris@beentheregotout.com. And Charlie, you want to give your contact information?
Yes, it's charliemccready.com. And also, if you look up Charlie McCready on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, you should find me as well.
Yeah, and us easy too. Been there, got out everywhere. We have a
You,
YouTube channel and a podcast. We've worked with Charlie before. We're thrilled to continue working with him, and he's taking up a lot of space in our current book that's coming out in January called When Your
thank you.
Ex Turns the Kids Against You.
But you guys are brilliant. What you're doing in the legal stuff is just so important. So I'm delighted that we're working together because these things go hand in hand. It's
Yes, us too.
really, really
So
powerful what you do.
yeah, we will once we pick another date for the next one, probably sometime in November, we'll tell everyone and see you back. And in the meantime, hang in there.
Fantastic.
All
Thanks very
right.
much, guys.
Bye.